With such words the Bab quickened the faith of his disciples and launched them upon their mission. To each he assigned his own native province as the field of his labors. He directed them each and all to refrain from specific references to his own name and person. He instructed them to raise the call that the gate to the promised one has been opened, that his proof is irrefutable, and that his testimony is complete. He bade them declare that whoever believes in him has believed in all the prophets of God, and that whoever denies him has denied all his saints and his chosen ones. With these instructions he dismissed them from his presence and committed them to the care of God. Of these letters of the living, whom he thus addressed, there remained with him in Shiraz Mullah Hussein, the first of these letters, and Qudus, the last. The rest, 14 in number, set out at the hour of dawn from Shiraz, each resolved to carry out in its entirety the task with which he had been entrusted. To Mullah Hussein, as the hour of his departure approached, the Bab addressed these words: "Grieve not that you have not been chosen to accompany me on my pilgrimage to Hijaz. I shall instead direct your steps to that city which enshrines a mystery of such transcendent holiness as neither Hijaz nor Shiraz can hope to rival. My hope is that you may, by the aid of God, be enabled to remove the veils from the eyes of the wayward and to cleanse the minds of the malevolent. Visit on your way Isfahan, Kashan, Tiran, and Khorasan. Proceed thence to Iraq, and there await the summons of your Lord, who will keep watch over you and will direct you to whatsoever is his will and desire. As to myself, I shall, accompanied by Qudus and my Ethiopian servant, proceed on my pilgrimage to Hijaz. I shall join the company of the pilgrims of Fars, who will shortly be sailing for that land. I shall visit Mecca and Medina, and there fulfill the mission with which God has entrusted me. God willing, I shall return hither by the way of Kufi, in which place I hope to meet you. If it be decreed otherwise, I shall ask you to join me in Shiraz. The host of the invisible kingdom, be assured, will sustain and reinforce your efforts. The essence of power is now dwelling in you, and the company of his chosen angels revolves around you. His almighty arms will surround you, and his unfailing spirit will ever continue to guide your steps. He that loves you loves God, and whoever opposes you has opposed God. Whoso befriends you, him will God befriend, and whoso rejects you, him will God reject." Chapter 4. Mullah Hussein's Journey to Tehran. With these noble words ringing in his ears, Mullah Hussein embarked upon his perilous enterprise. Wherever he went, to whatever class of people he addressed himself, he delivered fearlessly and without reserve the message with which his beloved master had entrusted him. Arriving in Isfahan, he established himself in the Madrisi of Nim Avad. Around him gathered those who on his previous visit to that city had known him as the favored messenger of Sayyid Qasim to the eminent Mujtahid Haji Sayyid Muhammad Bakir. He, being now dead, had been succeeded by his son, who had just returned from Najaf and was now established upon the seat of his father. Haji Muhammad Ibrahim I Kalbasi had also fallen seriously ill and was on the verge of death. The disciples of the late Haji Sayyid Muhammad Bakir, now freed from the restraining influence of their departed teacher, and alarmed at the strange doctrines which Mullah Hussein was propounding, vehemently denounced him to Haji Sayyid Asadullah, the son of the late Haji Sayyid Muhammad Bakir. Mullah Hussein, they complained, was able in the course of his last visit to win the support of your illustrious father to the cause of Sheikh Ahmad. No one among the Sayyid's helpless disciples dared to oppose him. He now comes as the upholder of a still more formidable opponent, and is pleading his cause with still greater vehemence and vigor. He is persistently claiming that he whose cause he now champions is the revealer of a book which is divinely inspired, and which bears a striking resemblance to the tone and language of the Koran. In the face of the people of this city, he has flung these challenging words: "Produce one like it if you are men of truth." The day is fast approaching when the whole of Isfahan will have embraced his cause. Haji Syed Asadullah returned evasive answers to their complaints. What am I to say? He was at last forced to reply. Do you not yourselves admit that Mullah Hussein has, by his eloquence and the cogency of his argument, silenced a man no less great than my illustrious father? How can I, then, who am so inferior to him in merit and knowledge, presume to challenge what he has already approved? Let each man dispassionately examine these claims. If he be satisfied, well and good. If not, let him observe silence, and not incur the risk of discrediting the fair name of our faith. Finding that their efforts had failed to influence Haji Syed Asadullah, his disciples referred the matter to Haji Muhammad Ibrahim e Kalbasi. Woe betide us, they loudly protested, for the enemy has risen to disrupt the holy faith of Islam. In lurid and exaggerated language, they stressed the challenging character of the ideas propounded by Mullah Hussein. Hold your peace, replied Haji Muhammad Ibrahim. Mullah Hussein is not the person to be duped by anyone, nor can he fall a victim to dangerous heresies. If your contention be true, if Mullah Hussein has indeed espoused a new faith, it is unquestionably your first obligation to inquire dispassionately into the character of his teachings, and to refrain from denouncing him without previous and careful scrutiny. If my health and strength be restored, it is my intention, God willing, to investigate the matter myself, and to ascertain the truth. This severe rebuke, pronounced by Haji Kalbasi, greatly disconcerted the disciples of Haji Syed Asadullah. In their dismay they appealed to Manichir Khan, the Mutamidur Dawle, the governor of the city. That wise and judicious ruler refused to interfere in these matters, which he said fell exclusively within the jurisdiction of the ulamas. He warned them to abstain from mischief, and to cease disturbing the peace and tranquility of the messenger. His trenchant words shattered the hopes of the mischief-makers. Mullah Hussein was thereby relieved from the machinations of his enemies, and for a time pursued untrammeled the course of his labours. The first to embrace the cause of the Bab in that city was a man, a sifter of wheat, who, as soon as the call reached his ears, unreservedly accepted the message. With marvellous devotion he served Mullah Hussein, and through his close association with him became a zealous advocate of the new revelation. A few years later, when the soul-stirring details of the siege of the fort of Sheikh Tawbasi were being recounted to him, he felt an irresistible impulse to throw in his lot with those heroic companions of the Bab who had risen for the defense of their faith. Carrying his sieve in his hand, he immediately arose and set out to reach the scene of that memorable encounter. "Why leave so hurriedly?" his friends asked him as they saw him running in a state of intense excitement through the bazaars of Isfahan. "I have risen," he replied, "to join the glorious company of the defenders of the fort of Sheikh Tawbasi. With this sieve, which I carry with me, I intend to sift the people in every city through which I pass. Whomsoever I find ready to espouse the cause I have embraced, I will ask to him to join me and hasten forthwith to the field of martyrdom." Such was the devotion of this youth, that the Bab, in the Persian Bayan, refers to him in such terms: "Isfahan, that outstanding city, is distinguished by the religious fervour of its Shia inhabitants, by the learning of its divines, and by the keen expectation, shared by high and low alike, of the imminent coming of the Sahibuz Saman. In every quarter of that city religious institutions have been established, and yet, when the messenger of God had been made manifest, they who claimed to be the repositories of learning and the expounders of the mysteries of the faith of God rejected his message. Of all the inhabitants of that seat of learning, only one person, a sifter of wheat, was found to recognize the truth and was invested with a robe of divine virtue." There is a footnote. "Behold the land of Sad, Isfahan, which in this world of appearances is the greatest of lands. In every one of its schools numerous slaves are found who bear the name of savants and contestants. At the time of the election of members, even a sifter of grain may put on the garb of primacy above the others. It is here that the secret of the word of the Imams regarding the manifestation shines forth. The lowliest of the creatures shall become the most exalted, and the most exalted shall become the most debased." The Persian Bayan, Volume 4, page 113. Among the Sayyids of Isfahan, a few, such as Mirza Muhammad Ali Inari, whose daughter was subsequently joined in wedlock with the most great branch, a reference to Abdul-Baha's marriage with Muniri Khanum, Mirza Hadi, the brother of Mirza Muhammad Ali, and Mirza Muhammad Rizai-i Kali, recognized the truth of the cause. Mullah Sadiq-i Khorasani, formerly known as Muqaddas, and surnamed by Baha'u'llah Ismullahul Azdak, who, according to the instructions of Sayyid Kazim, had during the last 5 years been residing in Isfahan and had been preparing the way for the advent of the new revelation, was also among the first believers who identified themselves with the message proclaimed by the Bab. As soon as he learned of the arrival of Mullah Hussein in Isfahan, he hastened to meet him. He gives the following account of his first interview, which took place at night in the home of Mirza Muhammad Ali Inari. I asked Mullah Hussein to divulge the name of him who claimed to be the promised manifestation. He replied, "To inquire about that name and to divulge it are alike forbidden." Would it then be possible, I asked, for me, even as the letters of the living, to seek independently the grace of the All-Merciful and through prayer to discover his identity? "The door of his grace," he replied, "is never closed before the face of him who seeks to find him." I immediately retired from his presence and requested his host to allow me the privacy of a room in his house where, alone and undisturbed, I could commune with God. In the midst of my contemplation, I suddenly remembered the face of a youth whom I had often observed while in Karbala, standing in an attitude of prayer, with his face bathed in tears at the entrance of the shrine of the Imam Hussein. That same countenance now reappeared before my eyes. In my vision I seemed to behold that same face, those same features, expressive of such joys as I could never describe. He smiled as he gazed at me. I went towards him, ready to throw myself at his feet. I was bending towards the ground when, lo, that radiant figure vanished from before me. Overpowered with joy and gladness, I ran out to meet Mullah Hussein, who, with transport, received me and assured me that I had at last attained the object of my desire. He bade me, however, repress my feelings. "Declare not your vision to anyone," he urged me. "The time for it has not yet arrived. You have reaped the fruit of your patient waiting in Isfahan. You should now proceed to Kirman, and there acquaint Haji Mirza Karim Khan with this message. From that place you should travel to Shiraz, and endeavor to rouse the people of that city from their heedlessness. I hope to join you in Shiraz and share with you the blessings of a joyous reunion with our beloved." From Isfahan, Mullah Hussein proceeded to Kashan. The first to be enrolled in that city among the company of the faithful was a certain Haji Mirza Jani, surnamed Pa, who was a merchant of note. Among the friends of Mullah Hussein was a well-known divine, Sayyid Abdul Baqi, a resident of Kashan and a member of the Shaykhi community. Although intimately associated with Mullah Hussein during his stay in Najaf and Karbala, the Sayyid felt unable to sacrifice rank and leadership for the message which his friend had brought him. Arriving in Qum, Mullah Hussein found its people utterly unprepared to heed his call. The seed he sowed among them did not germinate until the time when Baha'u'llah was exiled to Baghdad. In those days, Haji Mirza Musa, a native of Qum, embraced the faith, journeyed to Baghdad, and there met Baha'u'llah. He eventually quaffed the cup of martyrdom in his path. From Qum, Mullah Hussein proceeded directly to Tehran. He lived, during his stay in the capital, in one of the rooms which belonged to the Madrisi of Mirza Salih, better known as the Madrisi of Pei-i-Minar. Haji Mirza Muhammad-i Khorasani, the leader of the Shaykhi community in Tehran, who acted as an instructor in that institution, was approached by Mullah Hussein, but failed to respond to his invitation to accept the message. "We had cherished the hope," he said to Mullah Hussein, "that after the death of Sayyid Kazim, you would strive to promote the best interests of the Shaykhi community, and would deliver it from the obscurity into which it has sunk. You seem, however, to have betrayed its cause. You have shattered our fondest expectations. If you persist in disseminating these subversive doctrines, you will eventually extinguish the remnants of the Shaykhis in this city." Mullah Hussein assured him that he had no intention of prolonging his stay in Tehran, that his aim was in no wise to abase or suppress the teachings inculcated by Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. During his stay in Tehran, Mullah Hussein each day would leave his room early in the morning and would return to it only an hour after sunset. Upon his return, he would quietly and alone re-enter his room, close the door behind him, and remain in the privacy of his cell until the next day. Mirza Musa, Akhe-i Kalim, the brother of Baha'u'llah, recounted to me the following. I have heard Mullah Muhammad-i Mu'alim, a native of Nur, in the province of Mazin-Daran, who was a fervent admirer of both Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim, relate this story. I was in those days recognized as one of the favored disciples of Haji Mirza Muhammad, and lived in the same school in which he taught. My room adjoined his room, and we were closely associated together. On the day that he was engaged in discussion with Mullah Hussein, I overheard their conversation from beginning to end, and was deeply affected by the ardor, the fluency, and learning of that youthful stranger. I was surprised at the evasive answers, the arrogance and contemptuous behavior of Haji Mirza Muhammad. That day I felt strongly attracted by the charm of that youth, and deeply resented the unseemly conduct of my teacher toward him. I concealed my feelings, however, and pretended to ignore his discussions with Mullah Hussein. I was seized with a passionate desire to meet the latter, and ventured at the hour of midnight to visit him. He did not expect me, but I knocked at his door and found him awake, seated beside his lamp. He received me affectionately, and spoke to me with extreme courtesy and tenderness. I unburdened my heart to him, and as I was addressing him, tears which I could not repress flowed from my eyes. I can now see, he said, the reason why I have chosen to dwell in this place. Your teacher has contemptuously rejected this message and despised its author. My hope is that his pupil may, unlike his master, recognize its truth. What is your name, and which city is your home? My name, I replied, is Mullah Muhammad, and my surname Mu'alim. My home is Nur, in the province of Mazin-Daran. Tell me, further inquired Mullah Hussein, is there today among the family of the late Mirza Buzurg-i-Nuri, who was so renowned for his character, his charm, and artistic and intellectual attainments, anyone who has proved himself capable of maintaining the high traditions of that illustrious house? Yes, I replied. Among his sons now living, one has distinguished himself by the very traits which characterized his father. By his virtuous life, his high attainments, his loving kindness and liberality, he has proved himself a noble descendant of a noble father. What is his occupation? He asked me. He cheers the disconsolate and feeds the hungry, I replied. What of his rank and position? He has none, I said, apart from befriending the poor and the stranger. What is his name? Hussein Ali. In which of the scripts of his father does he excel? His favorite script is Shikasti Nastalik. How does he spend his time? He roams the woods and delights in the beauties of the countryside. What is his age? 28. The eagerness with which Mullah Hussein questioned me, and the sense of delight with which he welcomed every particular I gave him, greatly surprised me. Turning to me, with his face beaming with satisfaction and joy, he once more inquired, I presume you often meet him? I frequently visit his home, I replied. Will you, he said, deliver into his hands a trust from me? Most assuredly, was my reply. He then gave me a scroll wrapped in a piece of cloth, and requested me to hand it to him the next day at the hour of dawn. Should he deign to answer me, he added, will you be kind enough to acquaint me with his reply? I received the scroll from him, and at the break of day arose to carry out his desire. As I approached the house of Baha'u'llah, I recognized his brother, Mirza Musa, who was standing at the gate, and to whom I communicated the object of my visit. He went into the house, and soon reappeared bearing a message of welcome. I was ushered into his presence, and presented the scroll to Mirza Musa, who laid it before Baha'u'llah. He bade us both be seated. Unfolding the scroll, he glanced at its contents, and began to read aloud to us certain of its passages. I sat enraptured as I listened to the sound of his voice and the sweetness of its melody. He had read a passage of the scroll when, turning to his brother, he said, Musa, what have you to say? Verily I say, whoso believes in the Koran and recognizes its divine origin and yet hesitates, though it be for a moment, to admit that these soul-stirring words are endowed with the same regenerating power, has most assuredly erred in his judgment, and has strayed far from the path of justice. He spoke no more. Dismissing me from his presence, he charged me to take Mullah Hussein as a gift from him a loaf of Russian sugar and a package of tea, and to convey to him the expression of his appreciation and love. I arose and, filled with joy, hastened back to Mullah Hussein and delivered to him the gift and message of Baha'u'llah. With what joy and exultation he received them from me! Words fail me to describe the intensity of his emotion. He started to his feet, received with bowed head the gift from my hand, and fervently kissed it. He then took me in his arms, kissed my eyes, and said, "My dearly beloved friend, I pray that even as you have rejoiced my heart, God may grant you eternal felicity, and fill your heart with imperishable gladness." I was amazed at the behavior of Mullah Hussein. What could be, I thought to myself, the nature of the bond that unites these two souls? What could have kindled so fervid a fellowship in their hearts? Why should Mullah Hussein, in whose sight the pomp and circumstance of royalty were the merest trifle, have evinced such gladness at the sight of so inconsiderable a gift from the hands of Baha'u'llah? I was puzzled by this thought and could not unravel its mystery. A few days later, Mullah Hussein left for Khorasan. As he bade me farewell, he said, "Breathe not to anyone what you have heard and witnessed. Let this be a secret hidden within your heart. Divulge not his name, for they who envy his position will arise to harm him. In your moments of meditation, pray that the Almighty may protect him, that through him he may exalt the downtrodden, enrich the poor, and redeem the fallen. The secret of things is concealed from our eyes. Ours is the duty to raise the call of the new day and to proclaim this divine message unto all people. Many a soul will in this city shed his blood in this path. That blood will water the tree of God, will cause it to flourish, and to overshadow all mankind." Chapter 5. Baha'u'llah's Journey to Mazin-Daran. The first journey Baha'u'llah undertook for the purpose of promoting the revelation announced by the Bab was to his ancestral home in Nur, in the province of Mazin-Daran. He set out for the village of Takur, the personal estate of his father, where he owned a vast mansion royally furnished and superbly situated. It was my privilege to hear Baha'u'llah himself one day recount the following. The late Vizier, my father, enjoyed a most enviable position among his countrymen. His vast wealth, his noble ancestry, his artistic attainments, his unrivaled prestige and exalted rank made him the object of the admiration of all who knew him. For a period of over 20 years, no one among the wide circle of his family and kindred, which extended over Nur and Tehran, suffered distress, injury, or illness. They enjoyed, during a long and uninterrupted period, rich and manifold blessings. Quite suddenly, however, this prosperity and glory gave way to a series of calamities which severely shook the foundations of his material prosperity. The first loss he suffered was occasioned by a great flood which, rising in the mountains of Mazin-Daran, swept with great violence over the village of Takur and utterly destroyed half the mansion of the Vizier, situated above the fortress of that village. The best part of that house, which had been known for the solidity of its foundations, was utterly wiped away by the fury of the roaring torrent. Its precious articles of furniture were destroyed, and its elaborate ornamentation irretrievably ruined. This was shortly followed by the loss of various state positions which the Vizier occupied, and by the repeated assaults directed against him by his envious adversaries. Despite this sudden change of fortune, the Vizier maintained his dignity and calm, and continued, within the restricted limits of his means, his acts of benevolence and charity. He continued to exercise towards his faithless associates that same courtesy and kindness that had characterized his dealings with his fellow men. With splendid fortitude he grappled, until the last hour of his life, with the adversities that weighed so heavily upon him. Baha'u'llah had already, prior to the declaration of the Bab, visited the district of Nur at a time when the celebrated Mujtahid Mirza Muhammad Taqi-i Nuri was at the height of his authority and influence. Such was the eminence of his position that they who sat at his feet regarded themselves each as the authorized exponent of the faith and law of Islam. The Mujtahid was addressing a company of over 200 of such disciples and was expatiating upon the dark passage of the reported utterances of the Imams, when Baha'u'llah, followed by a number of his companions, passed by that place and paused for a while to listen to his discourse. The Mujtahid asked his disciples to elucidate an abstruse theory relating to the metaphysical aspects of the Islamic teachings. As they all confessed their inability to explain it, Baha'u'llah was moved to give, in brief but convincing language, a lucid exposition of that theory. The Mujtahid was greatly annoyed at the incompetence of his disciples. "For years I have been instructing you," he angrily exclaimed, "and have patiently striven to instill into your minds the profoundest truths and the noblest principles of the faith, and yet you allow, after all these years of persistent study, this youth, a wearer of the Kula, who has had no share in scholarly training and who is entirely unfamiliar with your academic learning, to demonstrate his superiority over you." There is a footnote. Kula, a lambskin hat, differentiated the clergy from the laity and was worn invariably by state officials. Later on, when Baha'u'llah had departed, the Mujtahid related to his disciples two of his recent dreams, the circumstances of which he believed were of the utmost significance. "In my first dream," he said, "I was standing in the midst of a vast concourse of people, all of whom seemed to be pointing to a certain house in which they said the Sahibuz Zaman dwelt. Frantic with joy, I hastened in my dream to attain his presence. When I reached the house, I was, to my great surprise, refused admission. The promised Qaim, I was informed, is engaged in private conversation with another person. Access to them is strictly forbidden. From the guards who were standing beside the door, I gathered that the person was none other than Baha'u'llah. In my second dream," the Mujtahid continued, "I found myself in a place where I beheld around me a number of coffers, each of which, it was stated, belonged to Baha'u'llah. As I opened them, I found them to be filled with books. Every word and letter recorded in these books was set with the most exquisite jewels. Their radiance dazzled me. I was so overpowered by their brilliance that I awoke suddenly from my dream." When, in the year 1260, AD 1844, Baha'u'llah arrived in Nur, he discovered that the celebrated Mujtahid, who on his previous visit had wielded such immense power, had passed away. The vast number of his devotees had shrunk into a mere handful of dejected disciples, who, under the leadership of his successor, Mullah Muhammad, were striving to uphold the traditions of their departed leader. The enthusiasm which greeted Baha'u'llah's arrival sharply contrasted with the gloom that had settled upon the remnants of that once flourishing community. A large number of the officials and notables in that neighborhood called upon him and, with every mark of affection and respect, accorded him a befitting welcome. They were eager, in view of the social position he occupied, to learn from him all the news regarding the life of the Shah, the activities of his ministers, and the affairs of his government. To their inquiries, Baha'u'llah replied with extreme indifference, and seemed to reveal very little interest or concern. With persuasive eloquence, he pleaded the cause of the new revelation, and directed their attention to the immeasurable benefits which it was destined to confer upon their country. Those who heard him marveled at the keen interest which a man of his position and age evinced for truths which primarily concerned the divines and theologians of Islam. They felt powerless to challenge the soundness of his arguments, or to belittle the cause which he so ably expounded. They admired the loftiness of his enthusiasm and the profundity of his thoughts, and were deeply impressed by his attachment and self-effacement. None dared to contend with his views except his uncle, Aziz, who ventured to oppose him, challenging his statements and aspersing their truth. When those who heard him sought to silence this opponent and to injure him, Baha'u'llah intervened in his behalf, and advised them to leave him in the hands of God. Alarmed, he sought the aid of the Mujtahid of Nur, Mullah Muhammad, and appealed to him to lend him immediate assistance. "O Vice-Regent of the Prophet of God," he said, "behold what has befallen the faith. A youth, a layman, attired in the garb of nobility, has come to Nur, has invaded the stronghold of orthodoxy, and disrupted the holy faith of Islam. Arise and resist his onslaught. Whoever attains his presence falls immediately under his spell, and is enthralled by the power of his utterance. I know not whether he is a sorcerer, or whether he mixes with his tea some mysterious substance that makes every man who drinks the tea fall a victim to its charm." The Mujtahid, notwithstanding his own lack of comprehension, was able to realize the folly of such remarks. Jestingly he observed, "Have you not partaken of his tea, or heard him address his companions?" "I have," he replied, "but thanks to your loving protection, I have remained immune from the effect of his mysterious power." The Mujtahid, finding himself unequal to the task of arousing the populace against Baha'u'llah, and of combating directly the ideas which so powerful an opponent was fearlessly spreading, contented himself with a written statement in which he declared, "O Aziz, be not afraid, no one will dare molest you." In writing this, the Mujtahid had, through a grammatical error, so perverted the purport of his statement that those who read it among the notables of the village of Takur were scandalized by its meaning, and vilified both the bearer and the author of that statement. Those who attained the presence of Baha'u'llah and heard him expound the message proclaimed by the Bab were so much impressed by the earnestness of his appeal that they forthwith arose to disseminate that same message among the people of Nur and to extol the virtues of its distinguished promoter. The disciples of Mullah Muhammad, meanwhile, endeavored to persuade their teacher to proceed to Takur to visit Baha'u'llah in person, to ascertain from him the nature of this new revelation, and to enlighten his followers regarding its character and purpose. To their earnest entreaty, the Mujtahid returned an evasive answer. His disciples, however, refused to admit the validity of the objections he raised. They urged that the first obligation imposed upon a man of his position, whose function was to preserve the integrity of Shia Islam, was to inquire into the nature of every movement that tended to affect the interests of their faith. Mullah Muhammad eventually decided to delegate two of his eminent lieutenants, Mullah Abbas and Mirza Abul Qasim, both sons-in-law and trusted disciples of the late Mujtahid Mirza Muhammad Taqi, to visit Baha'u'llah and to determine the true character of the message he had brought. He pledged himself to endorse unreservedly whatever conclusions they might arrive at, and to recognize their decision in such matters as final. On being informed, upon their arrival in Takur, that Baha'u'llah had departed for his winter resort, the representatives of Mullah Muhammad decided to leave for that place. When they arrived, they found Baha'u'llah engaged in revealing a commentary on the opening surah of the Quran entitled "The 7 Verses of Repetition." As they sat and listened to his discourse, the loftiness of the theme, the persuasive eloquence which characterized its presentation, as well as the extraordinary manner of its delivery, profoundly impressed them. Mullah Abbas, unable to contain himself, arose from his seat and, urged by an impulse he could not resist, walked back and stood still beside the door in an attitude of reverent submissiveness. The charm of the discourse to which he was listening had fascinated him. "You behold my condition," he told his companion as he stood trembling with emotion and eyes full of tears. "I am powerless to question Baha'u'llah. The questions I had planned to ask him have vanished suddenly from my memory. You are free either to proceed with your inquiry or to return alone to our teacher and inform him of the state in which I find myself. Tell him from me that Abbas can never again return to him. He can no longer forsake this threshold." Mirza Abul Qasim was likewise moved to follow the example of his companion. "I have ceased to recognize my teacher," was his reply. "This very moment I have vowed to God to dedicate the remaining days of my life to the service of Baha'u'llah, my true and only master." The news of the sudden conversion of the chosen envoys of the Mujtahid of Nur spread with bewildering rapidity through the district. It roused the people from their lethargy. Ecclesiastical dignitaries, state officials, traders and peasants all flocked to the residence of Baha'u'llah. A considerable number among them willingly espoused his cause. In their admiration for him, a number of the most distinguished among them remarked, "We see how the people of Nur have risen and rallied around you. We witness on every side evidences of their exultation. if Mullah Muhammad were also to join them, the triumph of this faith would be completely assured. I am come to Nur, Baha'u'llah replied, solely for the purpose of proclaiming the cause of God. I cherish no other intention. If I were told that at a distance of 100 leagues a seeker yearned for the truth and was unable to meet me, I would, gladly and unhesitatingly, hasten to his abode, and would myself satisfy his hunger. Mullah Muhammad, I am told, lives in Sa'adat Abad, a village not far distant from this place. It is my purpose to visit him and deliver to him the message of God. Desirous of giving effect to his words, Baha'u'llah, accompanied by a number of his companions, proceeded immediately to that village. Mullah Muhammad most ceremoniously received him. I have not come to this place, Baha'u'llah observed, to pay you an official or formal visit. My purpose is to enlighten you regarding a new and wondrous message, divinely inspired and fulfilling the promise given to Islam. Whosoever has inclined his ear to this message has felt its irresistible power and has been transformed by the potency of its grace. Tell me whatsoever perplexes your mind or hinders you from recognizing the truth. Mullah Muhammad disparagingly remarked, I undertake no action unless I first consult the Quran. I have invariably on such occasions followed the practice of invoking the aid of God and his blessings, of opening at random his sacred book, and of consulting the first verse of the particular page upon which my eyes chance to fall. From the nature of that verse I can judge the wisdom and the advisability of my contemplated course of action. Finding that Baha'u'llah was not inclined to refuse him his request, the Mujtahid called for a copy of the Quran, opened and closed it again, refusing to reveal the nature of the verse to those who were present. All he said was this: I have consulted the Book of God and deem it inadvisable to proceed further with this matter. A few agreed with him. The rest, for the most part, did not fail to recognize the fear which those words implied. Baha'u'llah, disinclined to cause him further embarrassment, arose and, asking to be excused, bade him a cordial farewell. One day, in the course of one of his riding excursions into the country, Baha'u'llah, accompanied by his companions, saw, seated by the roadside, a lonely youth. His hair was disheveled, and he wore the dress of a dervish. By the side of a brook he had kindled a fire, and was cooking his food and eating it. Approaching him, Baha'u'llah most lovingly inquired, Tell me, dervish, what is it that you are doing? I am engaged in eating God, he bluntly replied. I am cooking God and am burning him. The unaffected simplicity of his manners and the candor of his reply pleased Baha'u'llah extremely. He smiled at his remark and began to converse with him with unrestrained tenderness and freedom. Within a short space of time, Baha'u'llah had changed him completely. Enlightened as to the true nature of God, and with a mind purged from the idle fancy of his own people, he immediately recognized the light which that loving stranger had so unexpectedly brought him. That dervish, whose name was Mustafa, became so enamored with the teachings which had been instilled into his mind that, leaving his cooking utensils behind, he straightway rose and followed Baha'u'llah. On foot, behind his horse, and inflamed with the fire of his love, he chanted merrily verses of a love song which he had composed on the spur of the moment and had dedicated to his beloved. Thou art the day-star of guidance, ran its glad refrain. Thou art the light of truth. Unveil thyself to men, O revealer of the truth. Although in later years that poem obtained wide circulation among his people, and it became known that a certain dervish, surnamed Majdub, and whose name was Mustafa Beg-i Sanandaji, had, without premeditation, composed it in praise of his beloved, none seemed to be aware to whom it actually referred. Nor did anyone suspect, at a time when Baha'u'llah was still veiled from the eyes of men, that this dervish alone had recognized his station and discovered his glory. Baha'u'llah's visit to Nur had produced the most far-reaching results, and had lent a remarkable impetus to the spread of the new-born revelation. By his magnetic eloquence, by the purity of his life, and the dignity of his bearing, by the unanswerable logic of his argument, and by the many evidences of his loving kindness, Baha'u'llah had won the hearts of the people of Nur, had stirred their souls, and had enrolled them under the standard of faith. Such was the effect of his words and deeds, as he went about preaching the cause and revealing its glory to his countrymen in Nur, that the very stones and trees of that district seemed to have been quickened by the waves of spiritual power which emanated from his person. All things seemed to be endowed with a new and more abundant life. All things seemed to be proclaiming aloud, "Behold, the beauty of God has been made manifest. Arise, for he has come in all his glory." The people of Nur, when Baha'u'llah had departed from out their midst, continued to propagate the cause and to consolidate its foundations. A number of them endured the severest afflictions for his sake. Others quaffed with gladness the cup of martyrdom in his path. Mazindaran in general, and Nur in particular, were thus designated from the other provinces and districts of Persia as being the first to have eagerly embraced the divine message. The district of Nur, literally meaning light, which lay embedded within the mountains of Mazindaran, was the first to catch the rays of the sun that had risen in Shiraz, the first to proclaim to the rest of Persia, which still lay enveloped in the shadow of the veil of heedlessness, that the day star of heavenly guidance had at length arisen to warm and illuminate the whole land. When Baha'u'llah was still a child, the Vizier, his father, dreamed a dream. Baha'u'llah appeared to him swimming in a vast, limitless ocean. His body shone upon the waters with a radiance that illuminated the sea. Around his head, which could distinctly be seen above the waters, there radiated in all directions his long jet-black locks, floating in great profusion above the waves. As he dreamed, a multitude of fishes gathered around him, each holding fast to the extremity of one hair. Fascinated by the effulgence of his face, they followed him in whatever direction he swam. Great as was their number, and however firmly they clung to his locks, not one single hair seemed to have been detached from his head, nor did the least injury affect his person. Free and unrestrained, he moved above the waters, and they all followed him. The Vizier, greatly impressed by this dream, summoned a soothsayer, who had achieved fame in the region, and asked him to interpret it for him. This man, as if inspired by a premonition of the future glory of Baha'u'llah, declared, "The limitless ocean that you have seen in your dream, O Vizier, is none other than the world of being. Single-handed and alone, your son will achieve supreme ascendancy over it. Wherever he may please, he will proceed unhindered. No one will resist his march. No one will hinder his progress. The multitude of fishes signifies the turmoil which he will arouse amidst the peoples and kindreds of the earth. Around him will they gather, and to him will they cling. Assured of the unfailing protection of the Almighty, this tumult will never harm his person, nor will his loneliness upon the sea of life endanger his safety." That soothsayer was subsequently taken to see Baha'u'llah. He looked intently upon his face and examined carefully his features. He was charmed by his appearance and extolled every trait of his countenance. Every expression in that face revealed to his eyes a sign of his concealed glory. So great was his admiration and so profuse his praise of Baha'u'llah that the Vizier, from that day, became even more passionately devoted to his son. The words spoken by that soothsayer served to fortify his hopes and confidence in him. Like Jacob, he desired only to ensure the well-being of his beloved Joseph and to surround him with his loving protection. Haji Mirza Akazi, the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah, though completely alienated from Baha'u'llah's father, showed his son every mark of consideration and favor. So great was the esteem which the Haji professed for him, that Mirza Akka Khan-i Nuri, the Itimadud Dawli, who afterwards succeeded Haji Mirza Akazi, felt envious. He resented the superiority which Baha'u'llah, as a mere youth, was accorded over him. The seeds of jealousy were, from that time, implanted in his breast. Though still a youth, and while his father is yet alive, he thought, "He is given precedence in the presence of the Grand Vizier. What will, I wonder, happen to me when this young man shall have succeeded his father?"